Hello and welcome. I am seeing if I can do this live without headphones. So I'm waiting to see if somebody joins so that you can tell me if you can hear me. I see Anka, hello, and Wit. Please tell me if you can hear me. I'm trying to see if I can do this without headphones because I'm just like, well, I'll tell you the truth, actually. I was going to say I don't want to wear the headphones, which is a little bit true. But the really true part is that I want to wear my earrings. And when I wear earrings that dangle like this, they knock against my headset and they're like a big bother. So wave if you can hear me. Let me know in the comments if you can't hear me. Send me like a whole shower of hearts if you can hear me. How about that? Let's see all the hearts. This is just my secret way of getting you to love me. Okay, nobody's saying that they can hear me or can't hear me, so I'm gonna hope that you can. And dive right in. I've actually had this topic's been rolling around in my mind for a while, largely because of an experience that I had about 4 years ago now. So I want to share that in just a moment. But the first thing is really about this idea, right? You know, people, I think it actually started out as like, if it's not a fuck yes, which might be a Mark Manson thing, kind of sounds like him. But this idea of like hell yes or hell no. And I remember I laughed out loud, actually, the first time I ever heard one of my mentors talk about this hell yes, hell no. And he was like, there's no such thing as hell maybe, that's just hell. And I thought, that ain't that the truth. So there's some of this I really love, and I have talked about it before, which is how valuable it can be to, like, you know, take a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, just think about like everything in your life, right? And like if it really isn't a hell yes, then that there is enormous freedom, and there's all this energy that gets freed up by going like, that is a hell no for now. Which is one of the pieces that I add to this practice, is specifically the, you know, parentheses for now. And I often, it's almost like a visualization for me. I'll often take ideas, like for me, when I do this practice, sometimes it's about things that are currently in my life, but a lot of times it's about like, because I have like a billion projects that I kind of want to do. Like I have a Google Doc that's about 3 pages long, you know, and like 10-point font or whatever, of ideas, like bullet pointed ideas for Facebook Lives. I have, you know, notebooks full of insights. I have, you know, constantly having ideas like, well, what about this program? Or what about like, maybe I should teach like this, or maybe I should collaborate with that. But like, I just have like so many potential projects. Sometimes my brain feels like it's gonna explode. And so for me, this kind of a practice is really valuable to just put all that in and go like, is this a hell yes for me right now? And it's really less about, do I love this idea? And more about looking at what I like to call the ecology or the ecosystem of my life. And one of the reasons I like to talk about ecology or ecosystem is, for me, that makes a lot of sense. Like just as like a felt, I think it's because I've spent a lot of time outdoors, like both as a kid and as an adult, and looking at, you know, when you change this, how does this change? And I mean, I spent hours, like really days. I spent days. My mother will corroborate, in the little stream that was behind our house when I was a kid, and I would move the rocks around, and I would clear out the leaves that got stuck, and I really watched the way that the water changes. You know, if you do this, then it rushes here, but then that gets stuck there. And so there's this sense of like the ecology, right? And then how does that impact the other parts of the environment? So for me, a lot of that has to do with like, I could be super excited about something, but if I look at like, what is it really going to take? And then I think like, okay, do I want to do those things? Does this support how I want to feel right now? How would this impact my children or my family? Like recently, one of the things that's up for me is that, you know, I do a fair bit of travel for work, which I mostly love. But I have these, sometimes I have these like 10-day, 11-day stints that I'm gone all in one chunk. And it's been fine. It's been more than fine. It's actually been fantastic. Even when it's been challenging, it's been fantastic for about 3 years. And for the first time, just this last month, I was like, I don't feel great about this. Like, I don't want to go. I am already missing my children. I'm not even gone yet. For the first time in years, had like a miscommunication with the father of one of my children, such that I was sorting out childcare, and it was a challenge. And I'm just really sitting with like, oh, this no longer serves the ecology of my life. It just shifted, and letting things change. And at the same time, my partner, I didn't even share all this with him, and my partner said, I don't want you gone for that long. And for me, that's part of the ecology. Is like, you know, does my partner get to tell me what I can and cannot do? No, you know, I don't think that. He doesn't think that. Nobody wants like the life where, you know, he's in charge of all my decisions. But it matters to me that he doesn't want me gone for that long. And so the ecology, you know, looking at like, how do all these things impact each other, that it might take something that even I'm like, wow, this is a fucking cool idea. I'm so excited. I want to do it. And not right now. Sometimes I can look at the whole year or the next couple of years and I can go like, oh, here, I think it really fits here. And sometimes I get that, this is where I started with this story. It was like, I get this visual almost of like a box, and it's like I'm putting certain ideas in a box and I'm putting them on the shelf. And I'm like, oh, in a month, I'm going to take that box off the shelf and I'm going to open it up again. And I'm going to like check out all the ideas and see if they fit into my life now, then, in a month. Thank you, Michael. I'm glad that the idea of an ecosystem, you know, it's like all the parts, and this is where I like to think about interdependence, right? We have this idea of codependence. We have this idea of independence. And to some extent, there's this idea of interdependence, but it's kind of a Buddhist term. It's a little maybe newer to the scene, but the fact is, like, everything does impact everything. So looking at what are those impacts? Do I want the implications of this? But what I wanted to also bring in, so that's a whole piece that I think is beautiful in its own right. I think it can be super valuable for even just as like a clearing technique to go like, is this a hell yes? And be like, wow, it's a yes, or there's a lot of good ideas, but it's not. Therefore, it's a no for now. And just like, whoosh, clear out that, you know, physical space, clear out that mental space, clear out like the, you know, whatever little bit of attention is kind of holding on. Or, you know, I do this with tabs on my computer too. Like right now I was like, oh fuck, can I even do a Facebook Live? Like I have like 20 tabs open, and sometimes I'm just like, close it all down. If I can't remember what it is, it's not important, you know. So there really is, I believe, truth to the importance of clearing out like the mental, emotional space of the maybes. Like, well, maybe I want to keep doing, like, I don't want to let it go yet, but I'm not fully going for it. That is an enormous amount of energy. Yeah, Stephanie said, I didn't leave my kids like for any chunk of time for 16 years, which is the opposite, you know, or at least very different than what I've done. And that had a huge impact for her on the flip side. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to take this little tangent here because that's how I roll. But I mean, there's a couple pieces. One is, I think it really becomes that way of going like, okay, what about now? And what about now? Rather than making global decisions, you know, like I will not travel away from my children for more than 2 days until they're 16, or I will do, you know, like making these global decisions is the willingness to keep meeting our lives and all the pieces, you know, keep meeting our children, to keep meeting our partners, to keep meeting our work in the world, to keep meeting ourselves even, you know, and go like, and what's right now? Like taking all of these pieces into consideration. What is the right next step? What is the best next step? What am I a hell yes to? And what needs to be set on the shelf for a later time? So here's the piece I want to bring in today, though, is that I've found like a lot of value in this idea of what would make this a hell yes. And the story for me, like the biggest story, I've had a number of smaller ones that might come in, but the biggest story is actually become a collaboration with another colleague and coach and teacher. And about 3.5 or 4 years ago, he reached out to me and offered me like a particular kind of collaboration. And what was being offered, I wasn't a hell yes to. I couldn't quite find a no. Like, it wasn't like, no, I don't want that. I wanted a lot of what he was offering. But when I went, like, I was actually more the physical, visceral response. Like if I just went point by point and was like, okay, this piece or this piece and this piece, everything looked good on paper. And I actually had other people that knew both of us who were like, you're crazy not to take that offer. Some of them said it, and some of them just, I could hear them thinking it. But I knew, I just knew myself well enough that I knew that, like, having this feeling that if there really wasn't that hell yes feeling, if like my body wasn't behind it, I would regret saying yes to it. But I was really stuck because I also was not a no. And every time I imagined saying no, thank you, like, what a generous offer, but no, thank you, I just like, ugh. But every time, if I imagined just saying yes to like just the offer just as it was, I also was like, I felt kind of heavy. I felt a little resentful. I felt tired. And so I felt really conflicted in this experience. And I don't remember quite how it came, but I had some conversations with friends and colleagues as I was going through this. And out of one of those conversations was this place where I was like, well, what would make this a hell yes? And I sat down and I just was like, oh, well, if I got paid this much, and if it looked like this, and if I got to do this in addition to this, some of it was actually asking for more responsibility. And some of it had to do with money, and some of it was like ways that I really wanted to be able to contribute that I wasn't being invited to contribute. And so it was that question. The initial question was, what would make this a hell yes? And then I sat down with this list and I was like, yeah, if I got to, lead this piece, and if I got to, and then I offered my like brilliance in the realm of how I could create this team this way. And and then I came up with a number where I was like, oh, now when I look at my family and the time that I'll be away and what it's going to take, this just feels fucking fantastic. And it was scary. It was scary to then, it's like a counter proposal. So this idea of counter proposal is not new, but I do think this idea of really taking it on as what would make this a hell yes, not like, well, what can I get? Or I deserve more money, or like, how do I counter this? It is less talked about. And so I was going inside a certain framework that was offered, but I was also basically offering a whole new thing. I was like, look, this thing is amazing, but look at this. And so it was vulnerable to offer that back. This was a person that I admired greatly, that I really wanted more connection with, that I did feel deeply honored that he was making a certain proposal to me, even though I wasn't a full yes to it. But so there's my experience, and then there was the response. It's like I ended up sending an email where I basically, again, it wasn't just like, well, this is a shitty proposal, here's what I want, but where I said, thank you, this is an amazing proposal, it's so generous, and here's what I love about it, and here's what else I can offer. And that was really the main way. That was like the biggest piece for me, was like, here's everything else I can actually do that you may not even know that I can do. And I don't want this to be like advicey about how to do this or how not to do this, but I didn't say anything about money, because for me, that was a conversation. You know, first I just wanted to say like, look, here's everything else. And I wrote this whole email about like, you know, I can do this, I can do this, I have this skill, I'm brilliant at this, like, and I got a call back within like 3 hours. I was with my kids, so I didn't take it, but I heard that on his voicemail, he said to me, he was like, Kendra, your email stopped me in my tracks. Let's have a conversation. And then I felt even more, you know, it was like butterflies. But then the beautiful piece was we got on the phone, and it really was about like, we had maybe an hour to an hour and a half long conversation where I took from the outline of what I'd written and I just fleshed it out. And I felt like I was basically just giving a gift. You know, whether he hired me, whether he said yes to this proposal, I was like, look, these are all the ways that this can be better. And like, this is my brilliant, and like, I give it to you freely. And here's how all the ways that I would make this fantastic if I was part of it, that I would feel so good about contributing. And just like, and once I got in the conversation, because it was like from love, it was kind of my love of him, but it was also my love of like, how this could be amazing, that I forgot. I even forgot about the money piece. And we got to the end of the conversation, there was this pause, and he said, this is more than a volunteer position. Go have a think about what you'd like to get paid, and then let's talk. And then I was really grateful that I had really sat down and asked myself that question, what would make this a hell yes? Because I was able to say, actually, I've already thought about that, and this is my number. And then there was what is, you know, more commonly considered like the what do you call that? You know, there are some countries where that's more, you know, you don't go in and just ask what the price is, but you like barter back and forth. The negotiation. So we had the negotiation about money. He said a number, and I was like, I feel great about that number. But the only reason that conversation could even happen was because I would say a couple things. So these are like, this is what I think is really important about this. One is that there is a value in paying attention to whether you are actually a hell yes, a full yes, a fuck yes, an embodied yes, you know, whatever language works for you, but like finding the place where it's like, I am just yes, there's no reservation. And if you're not that, sometimes it really is, like I said at the beginning, is like, I'm just going to put that idea on a shelf and I'm going to come back to it later. It's a no for now because it just isn't have a yes. But I didn't stop there with this particular proposal, as I was like, oh, I'm not feeling that whole yes, but there's something here. So recognizing there's something here, and then taking the time to ask myself the question, what would make this a hell yes? And to not ask the question like, well, what else do I think I can get? Or within reason, what would make this a hell yes? Or what do I want that they will say yes to? But looking at like what's being asked or offered, and then just asking myself, what would make this a hell yes? What would make my body sing from this proposal? And being really honest with no attachment to getting it, but without holding back at all. Like, well, and then really remembering that a lot of it had to do with like things that I wanted to offer. They felt kind of like getting things, but it was less about like how much I need to get paid or what title I need or like the things I needed to get. It was like, I need to be able to offer my brilliant facilitation in this way, or I need to be able, like, this is what I need to give to the space, or this is the way that I need to be able to lead the team, or it had a lot to do with what I wanted to give that I knew I could give really well. And there was a piece, again, this idea of the ecology of my life that was like, in order for this to actually fit into the ecology of my life, for me to not drain my ecosystem in a way that is unsustainable for me and my family. This is what I need to get paid. But it all came from that question, what would make this a hell yes? And then there was just this willingness to like go through and basically give it, not go give my time for free or do the job as it were, but to give all the insights about like how I saw it could be, what I would do if I was there. And then, but then because I had actually already sat with, yeah, and this is what I know I would need to receive, that then having given all that, when this person, you know, he could see, because he's not stupid and he's a generous person also, he could see like, oh, this is like a position. This is not a volunteer position. Like you're offering something here. Then I already knew, hey, this is my number. And then that allowed us to have this very open negotiation about money and numbers. And it allowed me then to step into this role with like joy and excitement. And that particular collaboration has continued to be that way. But there is a way that I just do this in my life. So like I think about, so sometimes there really is this question, like what would make this a hell yes? And sometimes, but it's like, it's this question that I ask myself. It's like looking at the ecosystem and am I a hell yes? I caught myself maybe 2 years ago now, when I was still running Authentic SF, so like the Bay Area branch of Authentic World. And there was this moment where I was looking at my schedule and these things, and the thought went through my mind like, oh man, I should really lead an authentic relating game site. It's been a really long time. And I felt kind of like, oh, like where am I going to fit it in? And I mean, I think this is what comes when you do this work consistently with yourself, is that I was able to catch it right in that moment. I didn't schedule the event and go lead it. I didn't do, 6 more months. Like in that moment, I was like, oh, if I feel that way about this, I am probably not the best person to be leading those events. Cool. What am I going to do now? And ultimately called up 2 people that I was collaborating with, and I was like, here, let me give you this whole realm. And I gave it to one of the other people because he had way more excitement about that than I was like, oh man, where am I going to fit it in? He was like, fuck yeah. So I know there's been a couple comments. I just want to check back in here. First of all, Brenda, yeah, they approaching the situation with curiosity, and how often it works to do that with ourselves, actually approaching like, what's going on in here that's having me have that response? Is it like with this last example I gave, is it just time to let it go with someone else? Is it time to shift the dynamic? Is it time to do it more often? Is it time to do it less often? Is it time to like, what is actually needed here? So absolutely, curiosity towards self, certainly towards others. Stephanie, this was a while back, so there has to meet a critical mass reached for me to be a hell yes, no, either way. And my daughter just went through this choosing her college. Really interesting process to watch. Yes. I mean, this probably, so I'm not totally sure if this is going to speak to your experience, Stephanie, but there probably are different personalities, right? And some people are kind of like have a quicker, more fiery movement, and some people have a little bit slower, like more earthy movement, or these pieces. I will say that my experience of working with people around really finding their yeses and their nos, and I work with people more, it's not true. I was going to say I work with people more on finding their yeses, but I really do both, because a lot of times there's a challenge in finding the no or the boundary. What I have found, and this is not to say that this is true for you, Stephanie, but this sparked this in me, is I found that people actually usually know, and that actually it's fairly close to the surface. But most people have put buffers between their direct experience of their yes and of their no. So another practice that I'll offer here in service of that, and I think I've mentioned this before, but it's important here, is the willingness to tease apart knowing what your yes is and knowing what your no is, and any obligation to do that. So many people that I work with, what they find is that part of the reason that they have disassociated from knowing what's true for them, whether you want to call that their intuition, their body's response, their yes, their no, their desires, their boundaries, like this whole realm. A big part of the reason that they've either put a buffer there or disassociated from what the response is, or knowing what a yes or a no feels like in their body, is that they have they have a belief, usually unconscious, but there's a belief in there that says, if I know the answer to that question, then I have to do it. If I find out what is my boundary in relation to this person, then I have to set it. If I know what my desire is, then I have to go after it. If I listen to myself, then I have to follow what I say. And while I also, ultimately encourage and invite people to start taking those steps, I believe that the first step is actually just listening. And starting to find, I believe that our bodies especially have very clear and distinct ways of sharing the information. Yes, no, wait, stop, go, desire, move toward, like our bodies often tell us very, very clearly. And so I'll often encourage people to just listen and maybe take notes, like, oh, that was a clear yes, but I'm not going to do it. Like actually it's a yes, but I'm scared. Or it's a yes, but I think that person won't like it, so I'm not going to do it. Or it's a no, but I'm afraid of this person's response, so I'm going to say yes anyway. And that they're actually, not only do we not have to do what other people tell us to do, but we do not have to do what we tell ourselves to do. You're actually not obligated to follow your yeses and your nos if you find them. But I believe that it's incredibly valuable to find them. And then you start to have the choice about whether to say yes or no. When we have unconsciously distanced ourselves from those responses, we actually aren't at choice. So that's what I believe. So yeah, that was kind of a tangent, but I do think it's really relevant. And my experience with myself, and also my experience working with just thousands of men and women around different pieces of this, is that it's not that it takes time, but it takes consistency. So, just saying like, okay, now I want to hear my yes and my no, that part of you, the part of you that says yes, the part of you that says no, the part of you that knows your boundaries, the part of you that knows exactly what they want, often has not been listened to. And like a human, or like a child, or like, imagine if you think that people aren't listening to you, like your boss doesn't listen to anything you say, at some point you just stop bringing your ideas to them. That part of ourself is like that. It's like, why the fuck would I talk to you anymore? You never even listen. So that's the consistency, is actually first making a commitment and then keeping that commitment consistently. Like, I want to know what you have to say. I'm kind of gesturing here because this is where it is for me. But I would, I had a woman, it was her hands. She felt her yes and her no completely in her hands. And it was one of those experiences where she was saying like, I don't know, and I get confused, and there's so many, like, all these things. And then we did just some simple practices, and she was like, oh, I know completely, and I have known this my whole life. But I distanced myself from that feeling because it was scary. And so I teased it apart. I was like, great, so listen to what they have to say, but you don't necessarily have to do it, or it doesn't have to become black or white. So again, it becomes this, what would make this a hell yes? Or another question about that could be like, what's the smallest way that I can honor what the truth of my being is telling me? So for instance, like this woman I'm talking about was talking about being at a party and then wanting to leave. And she's like, but I couldn't do that. You know, that would be rude or this, but like, it was like her hands were fucking like, get out. And so I said, well, what, like, imagine the smallest way that you could honor the truth of your being, and that you're there and it's fine and it's fine. And then suddenly you're like, I want to leave. I was like, great. So excuse yourself from the table and go to the bathroom. And then just take, a few minutes to breathe and be like, okay, so what do I really want to do right now? Do I want to start saying my goodbyes so that part of me at least knows that I'm on my way out? Does that part of me just want to get my bag and go without saying goodbye? If I stay here in the bathroom for like 10 minutes and I just get quiet and silence and maybe even turn the light out and just get like some space, then do I feel comfortable staying for another 30 minutes? Like you can just respond with the smallest, the smallest acknowledgement of what your body mind is telling you. And even that will tell that part, I'm listening and I trust you. And then that part goes like, oh, well, maybe I'll say a little bit more. Maybe I have more wisdom to say. And that's where you can even get into the nuance of what would make this a hell yes, where that part can speak to you. And I would say parts, actually, plural, because I think all the parts of us have different things to say, partly as I was referencing in my live on Monday about the 4 brains. I won't give away the secret here. So I want to give just a few moments here to see if there's anybody else who's been listening who either is like, oh my God, yes, I had that experience, or oh my God, I have a totally different experience and you're wrong, or this is how that worked in my life, or this thing you said, I don't really understand it, or how could I apply that to this situation? Would love any questions or comments that you have in the last few moments before I sign off. And the same goes for anyone who's watching the replay, offer those questions. Sometimes when you're watching the replay, it's really helpful to give just a little bit of context, because I don't always know what I said that you're referring to when it's in the replay. But I love questions while we're live, and I love questions in the replay, and I will always come back and we can have like a written dialogue about it, even if it's not me speaking in a monologue. I will say that, there's a lot more I could say about the practices of listening to our body, mind, and it includes your brain. I'm certainly not saying don't listen to the brain in your head, although I will say that it's the brain in our head that doesn't listen, for instance, right, to like the sense of our hands that says that doesn't make sense. How can your hands know that it's time to leave? So it's a tricky piece, but I'm certainly not discrediting all of the wisdom that the brain in your head has that you can also listen to. But these pieces of practice are probably some of the most important in my life that have allowed me, like the story that I told, have allowed me then to go on to have a 4-year collaboration that has changed my life. That if I had simply said yes or simply said no, I don't think could have had the impact that it's had on my life over these last 4 years. That part of it was actually going at it from the what would make this a hell yes, and laying the foundation for what this collaboration looked like. That is like, it's like the imprint that went on to become what it is. that allowed me to give away, you know, the running of the Bay Area branch of Authentic World, that opened up all this space for other pieces of teaching that I have needed to do over the last couple of years. But it's this listening to what actually my response is. And then, like somebody said in the comments, getting curious about it, like, okay, so what's going on here? And what would shift this experience? What would make it a yes? Like, what would make it a clear no? What actually feels good as a response to the information I'm being given here? Great. Emmy said, I really liked it. Thank you. I'm so glad. Yes, this is really key. I forget sometimes because I've taken this teasing apart of the knowing and the decision. But this is, I think, probably one of my key pieces of teaching. And I think it's quite rare. Like there's more teachings around how to find your truth and knowing your boundaries and these things, but there's very little that's spoken about kind of teasing apart the getting in touch with what that is, and whatever the decision is. Exactly like you said, like the decision to act on it or not act on it. Like we think we just have to know, or that as soon as we get information, we have to choose one way or the other, or we have to do. And I guess I would say it takes some slowing down. It's like, I don't know if any of you have seen the X-Men, but he's shown up in a couple movies, but he's that guy who moves so fast that it's like the world slows down around him. And then he's able to like redirect things in the moment so that bullets don't hit people. And so it's tricky because it's not about moving faster, but there's a way that then the way that he sees the world becomes slowed down, that the way he can choose to move and act and redirect, like literally redirect reality, comes from that. And I just believe that that's so important. And really, I guess, I mean, I'm a huge proponent of choice, basically. And so any place that we've mapped, like this means that, if I do this, then this has to happen, I will pretty much always be like, well, let's just check that out. So thank you for underscoring that point, because it's really, really important. It's super hard not to act on it. Yeah, Emmy said it's hard not to act on it. When you know you're not aligned. Yes. And that is, I mean, frankly, that's the piece that is often somewhat unconscious, but it's the piece that often comes out first when I start doing this work with someone, is that they'll notice they're like afraid. And a lot of that has to do with like, we do actually know in some part of ourselves, like once we're aware of whether we're aligned or not aligned, we probably have to start moving in that direction. And it's one of the reasons why I want to create that space, because what I see is that fear of like, oh, fuck, now I'm going to have to act in alignment with my truth, stops people from even finding out what their truth is. And I just want more and more people to even be able to see, like, gosh, what is my truth? Or what is my yes? What's my no? What's my boundary? What's my desire? Like, so many people I see are like, I don't know what I want. Like, I just can't, I'm out of touch with my desires. And so often, I would say like 98% of the time, when we really slow it down and backtrack, it comes from, because I'm afraid if I know what they are, I'll have to act on them. And so I just like to create some space or some buffer, like, nope, doesn't mean a thing, just means you have a desire. And that often that's just enough space for people to go like, oh, maybe I can touch my desire. Maybe I have some sense of my boundary if I know that knowing my boundary doesn't mean I have to set it or act on it. So that's why I really love to create that space. So I saw a few people just joined, and you know, you're people I love, makes me want to keep talking. But I'm going to sign off here at the end. And hopefully some of you will have a chance to watch the replay and can give me, you know, the shares about your experience or where this lands in your life. But thank you. Thank you to those of you who were here for any portion of this live. And thank you to anyone who's watching the replay. And I just love your shares. I love your questions. Any of you who, if you have an experience of this and then bring it back to share with me, I'd love to hear your experiences. And hope this was helpful in some way. Ciao.